is that there is no atmosphere to shield against solar flares. So you would have to make your greenhouses out of glass at least 5 inches thick, which is a great impediment to creating substantial acreage of greenhouse agriculture. And the idea, by the way, of growing plants with electrical lights is fantastical. That is, if you just try to grow plants with electrical lights, if you took the agriculture of the state of Rhode Island, which I believe is the smallest state in the Union and not known as an agricultural giant, it would take all the electricity generated by the human race currently, globally, to illuminate Rhode Island with sufficient light to grow its crops. So I'm not a big fan of solar energy, actually, except I do believe it works great for outdoor lighting in the daytime and for agriculture, and that's what you need, and it will do it. So you have the availability of using solar energy on Mars for agriculture in a way that is simply not possible on the Moon. And furthermore, there's other sources of energy on Mars. There is geothermal energy, almost certainly. We know that Mars is geologically active. There are the great volcanoes on Mars are only a few 100 million years old, which may not seem that recent, except if you consider that is less than 10% of the life of a planet. So that if there could be volcanism, 10% of the life of the planet in the past, there could be volcanism today, and that means there's hot stuff underground, and we know that also as well because it appears that there is liquid groundwater on Mars. This is shown by photographs taken by the Mars Global Surveyor spacecraft between 2000 and 2006. It took before and after photos on the side of a crater, and a water erosion feature appeared on the side of that crater within that span of time, which means that during that time, during the last decade, there was a transient outflow of water from the side of a crater on Mars. And that means that there's a water table, and there can only be a water table if there's a source of underground heat, because the average surface temperature year-round is below the freezing point of water. So there's got to be heat coming from somewhere. It's coming from underground. That means that there's geothermal energy available on Mars, which we can tap. And by the way, geothermal energy is actually the 4th largest energy source on Earth after combustion, nuclear, and hydroelectric. The human race currently uses more geothermal power than wind, and much more than solar. And geothermal is a very good source of power in the sense that it is round the clock and reliable, unlike wind or solar. So the resources are there, in a way that they're simply not on the Moon. And furthermore, the challenge of doing this, of developing the technologies that can turn these potential resources into active resources, is something we can take on, and will develop our skills in a way to be able to address more difficult colonization challenges, such as the Moon or the asteroid. But furthermore, once humans are established on Mars, I think that will be the driver for the development of advanced propulsion. We do not need more advanced propulsion than we currently have to go to Mars. If you go to Mars with current day propulsion, it's a 6-month trip, which is the same amount of time as a standard rotation on the space station. It took 6 months to sail from England to Australia in the 1800s. It's manageable. And people will do it. To take 6 months to do a colonization voyage to Mars or an exploration voyage to Mars is acceptable. However, I think that once people are established on Mars, there will be the motive to develop faster forms of transportation. Just as Columbus sailed the Atlantic Ocean with ships that even 50 years later no one would have sailed the Atlantic in. They just wouldn't have. Well, why is that? Because at the time of Columbus, no one had developed Atlantic-capable ships. No one was sailing the Atlantic. So he sailed the Atlantic in ships that were designed either for Mediterranean or European coastal traffic. But once Europeans became transatlantic, there was the incentive to develop transatlantic ships. So they developed three-masted caravels and later clipper ships, and then steamboats and ocean liners, and eventually Boeing 747s. And so I think that, the grandchildren of the first colonists to Mars will listen with awe or perhaps disbelief to the stories of their grandparents on how they sailed to Mars in ships that took 6 months in cramped quarters, were smelly and noisy with the ventilator fans rattling against their cages all the time, and because in their day, people will do it in fusion-powered spacecraft that take 3 weeks to do the trip, and they do it in style. But the same ships that make it a matter of ease to travel from Earth to Mars will make it potentially viable for humans to be settling the outer solar system. And once we're established there, we'll raise the mark and push it further, and the same ships that make the outer solar system readily accessible will open the path for pioneering spirits to make it to the stars. Now, as far as the immediate challenge, I think people know that I am the developer of a plan to do human exploration of Mars with current technology known as Mars Direct. If you want to know all the details of the plan, I've laid it out in a book I've written called The Case for Mars, which you can get on Amazon. And for those who've read The Case for Mars, I have kind of an update, a short ebook called Mars Direct, which is it's a Kindle book. It's available on Amazon too. But the outlines of the plan are this. We do not need to build giant interplanetary spaceships like you see in science fiction movies to go to Mars. I like those movies. I like looking at those spaceships in movies, but I don't want to have to build one. And it's very good that we don't need to build them in order to go to Mars. Okay. What we need is a heavy lift booster. Ideal would be something with comparable capability to the Saturn V moon rocket that we built in the 60s, which should demonstrate that it's not technologically impossible. And those rockets were built by people who did not even have either calculators or push-button telephones. And we could certainly develop such things today. If you have a smaller rocket, such as the Falcon Heavy, the Saturn V could do 140 tons in low Earth orbit. The largest currently functioning rockets, Protons, Arianes, if you revive the shuttle are 20 tons to orbit. The Falcon Heavy is going to be able to do about 53. The NASA SLS, in its first incarnation, should do 75. So those are a third to a half of the Saturn V. If we had to do it with those kinds of vehicles, we might have to either scale down from the Mars Direct design or do the mission with a mate and dock, where one booster launches the trans-Mars injection stage and the other launches the rest of the payload, and they mate them together and then shoot them off. But I'm going to discuss this in the way I prefer to do it, which is with a true heavy lift booster. Because you should know that the SpaceX does intend to follow the Falcon Heavy with a 150-ton LEO booster, a true Saturn V equivalent. So if that comes along, we'll be able to do this way. If you're doing Mars Direct, you do it with 2 launches of the heavy lift booster. The first one shoots off to Mars, the Earth return vehicle, with no one in it. And this flies to Mars on a minimum energy trajectory. It's known as a home transfer. It would take 8.5 months to get to Mars. And then when it gets to Mars, it uses an aeroshell to aerobrake into Mars orbit. And then after we check it out, check out the weather, make sure everything's fine, We bring it back into the atmosphere in a more substantial way and use the aeroshell to slow us down to subsonic speeds, and then we pop a parachute, come down slow, and put ourselves down soft on the Martian surface with rockets, just like we did with Viking in 1976, or in a somewhat altered way as Curiosity did it last year. So now you have an Earth return vehicle sitting on Mars. Then what is done is we deploy a small nuclear reactor. About 100 kilowatts would do the job. That's equivalent to about 130 horsepower. So we're not talking about a giant nuclear power plant like what powers the city we're talking about. Just a nice little putt-putt nuke sitting in the back of the truck. And so the truck is telerobotically driven a few hundred meters away from the landing site, unwinding a cable off the back of it as it goes, and then it's put down on the ground, preferably in a crater or a ditch, or just on the reverse side of the hill, anything to put a nice sized chunk of dirt between the reactor and the main landing area. And then you turn the reactor on, and now you've got power at the ship. And what you do then is you run a pump. You suck in the Martian air, which is mostly carbon dioxide gas, and 95%. And you react that with a small amount of hydrogen that you brought from Earth. The hydrogen can be reacted with CO2 in the presence of the catalyst to turn it into methane and water. You store the methane, and then you take the water and you electrolyze it into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen you store, and the hydrogen you recycle to react with more CO2 to make more methane, and round you go. And then to get additional oxygen that you want to get the right mixture ratio for your rocket, you have a third reaction in which you break down CO2 into carbon monoxide and oxygen. You keep the oxygen, you get the carbon monoxide. It's okay to do that on Mars, there's no EPA there. And so what you then do is you turn 6 tons of hydrogen into about 108 tons of methane oxygen bipropellant on the surface of Mars. And in the mission plan, we need to use about 96 of the 108 to power the Earth return vehicle. The other 12 is available to power ground vehicles and combustion fuel cell engines, which will give you much greater mobility than you could ever have with battery-powered vehicles or isotope vehicles. And so now you've got a fully fueled Earth return vehicle sitting waiting for you on the surface of Mars. Then what you do with the next launch, you launch 2 more rockets off the Cape. One shoots out another one of the Earth return vehicle fuel factory fuels, which flies out to Mars minimum energy. The other one shoots out a Habitat spacecraft, which weighs about 40 tons and has a crew of 4 in it. And it flies a little bit faster than minimum energy trajectory. It doesn't take that much extra fuel to get to Mars in 6 months as opposed to 8. And although if you try to get there much faster, you start going up in exponential. In other words, it takes a lot of fuel to get there in 4 months instead of 6. To me, 6 compromise between mass and time. And it has another advantage, which is that the 6-month trajectory to Mars is also the free return trajectory. That is, if you're on this trajectory that gets you to Mars in 6 months, it's a bit faster than minimum energy, let's call it a medium energy trajectory. If you didn't stop, you would fly out into the inner asteroid belt, about 2 AU from the sun, and then you fly back, and you get back to Earth's orbit at 1 AU precisely 2 years after you left the Earth, so that the Earth would have gone around the sun twice and be there to meet you. If you tried to go to Mars faster than that, and you chose to abort this, fly out further than this, you'd get back to Earth after 2 years, and the Earth wouldn't be there. So you want to have the free return abort. This trajectory is the right answer. And so had a more advanced propulsion, like nuclear thermal rocket that might make a 5-month trajectory, for example, more practical, I would choose to use it to go to Mars in 6 months, just superior propulsion capability to take more payload. Okay? The 6-month is the right answer. But that's an abort option. and it's really something to use, just something to have in our back pocket if we need it. So we get to Mars in 6 months. We aerobrake at Mars, and then after checking out the weather and other things, we go into the atmosphere and go and we land at landing site number 1, where the fully fueled return vehicle is waiting for us. Now, we've been on the ground at landing site number 1 with robots for 2 years. They've explored that we know where all the lifting traps are, any big rocks to be avoided. They put a radar beacon on the ground in the best spot to land. We have an expert pilot flying this thing, land right on the spot. But let's say, let's say something goes wrong, we land 20, 30, 50 miles away from where we want. We're still okay because we would have us in the foredeck of our HAB, a pressurized ground rover with a one-way range, runs on a methane oxygen engine, because that's the food system on Mars, has a one-way flight to 600 miles. It would take extraordinarily bad piloting to land outside of the such a vehicle. But let's say that happens. Let's say we land on the wrong side of the planet, which would really represent a very serious pilot selection.
Robert, I'm just going to disconnect and reconnect because you're breaking up a little bit.